morning and welcome back. It is now July 24th and it is a beautiful morning out here right now. However, it is supposed to get up to 37, 38 degrees this afternoon, so things are going to start turning real fast, which they already are. Let's take a look at this barley here. Last week, this barley here was basically just transitioning into the dough stage. As you can see, it has come along substantially since then. So we do still have some greener heads mixed in that are in soft dough and even in milk stage here, and most of these are probably tillers. But we do have quite a few here that are now in the hard dough stage and are basically ripening and drying down. So heads like this, we might be able to combine by the end of the week, depending on how many of the green ones here are mixed in. Here, it's not a whole lot. We could definitely come in and swath this field basically at any time. If we did that, we could probably be combining it in about a week. Dryland canola seems to be in various stages. For the most part, it's pretty much finished or in final blooms and well into pod development. There is some pretty extreme flower blasting in a few fields from some of the heat. You can see like the end of these guys here, pretty well cooked off. But overall, pod development is coming along. It's just going to be a few weeks before we see color change, I think. But that, I guess, depends on the weather to a fair extent. Irrigated barley, of course, is developing pretty well as well. We are moving towards maturity here. However, it is much slower than the dryland. A lot of these heads are still, filling and relatively milky, but they are starting to move into the dough stage now. In this field of winter wheat, there is a couple of rye plants are in here. So this is fall rye, and of course it's maturing along at the same rate or thereabouts as the wheat. And you can see right here by my thumb, we have a couple really big kernels of ergot that have developed in here. It's very common with rye and to a certain extent with durum as well. A little bit less so with wheat, but that is definitely a risk here of having some rye mixed in with the wheat. But overall, it'll be such a small percentage, it's not really worthwhile, but still interesting to see. Here we have some irrigated barley with quite a grasshopper problem in here. So they are moving out of some grazeland, which is just over the top of the rise there, about 100 yards away. And you can see they're doing some pretty extensive head feeding in here. So we've got some good stem damage on these. Like it's knocked this head over. You can see this one here is pretty much cut off. Down here on the bottom, you can see a few heads on the ground down there already. So definitely we're going to have to come in here and spray this. I'm not sure if the microphone can pick it up, but you can really hear those guys singing. Well, it's now 35 degrees out here this afternoon, and it is getting a wee bit miserable. But you can see this dryland canola. You can see how much the conditions vary based on where the moisture was in the field. Some areas, like out here right in front of me, are just completely burning up. Other areas, like this patch I'm standing in here, is not too terribly bad. We are green. We're in pod formation here. We actually have some decent pod formation. We just have to keep the grasshoppers and other insects under control. But right now, not a huge deal. Well, the corn is certainly liking this weather. It is now well over 1 lisle tall here by Nobleford. So we have, way up here, there is some tassels are emerging. It's starting to pollinate up here. So that's got to be a good 11, 12 feet tall at the moment there. Down below here at the bottom, we do have some silks. So everything here is looking good. Tissue tests in this field passed with flying colors. We didn't have to do any fertigation. Our nitrogen levels were more than adequate. So we are good to go in here. Well, technically it's too hot for sweeping now, but I'm still getting some interesting results. It is now 36 degrees out here. You can see this dryland canola is really suffering. When we take a look in the sweep net, you can see just how many bugs are in here. And these are mostly little nymph lygus. And a lot of these guys are so small, they do not count towards the threshold yet. But once they get up to that size, like this guy here, where they got some black markings on their back, those guys are big enough, they're going to start damaging some of those pods. So if we count all them up, we're pretty much sitting at about a moderate to high level, maybe around 20 to 25 in this net. So we're definitely approaching threshold. But in just probably 4 or 5 days, a lot of these nymphs are going to be old enough that they're going to push that way over threshold. Well, here's a weed I don't often get to see. This is part of the Asteraceae family or sunflower family called cocklebur. It has these big oblong kind of football shaped rough burrs. They're quite thorny compared to something like a burdock, but yeah, it's a very interesting plant. The leaf appearance kind of reminds a guy a little bit of false ragweed, but then it obviously has the burrs. Well, up here at Carmen Gay, this late emerging canola is trying its best to flower and set pods, but it's not being super successful. You can see just how stressed this canola is, but it is still producing more buds. But you can see a lot of these flowers up here are not going to amount to anything at all. There is a few pods in some of these plants here, but they are going to be few and far between. And I'm afraid the yield potential for this field is going to be pretty low unless it gets a lot of moisture really fast. Well, after a few days of intense heat over the weekend, most of the pulse crops are ripening rapidly. This pea field here is in pretty much perfect staging for an application of something like Regulone Ion. However, it's pretty clean and it's fairly even, so we are going to skip that and just let it mature. So we're probably about a week away from combine timing in this particular field, but other fields are already getting cut right now. Just randomly found this lamb's quarters out in the field, and look at the seed production on the top of this. I have never seen that many flowers and seed production at the very top of the lamb's quarters before. This guy is definitely overcompensating for something. Well, this here is probably one of the saddest wheat fields I have seen yet this year. As you can see, gophers have pretty much taken almost the entire field except for a few patches of green regrowth that's kind of mixed in with some regrowth alfalfa. So you can see these patches are really, there's not a whole lot going to be here. This field is basically going to be an insurance case. I don't think there's a whole lot worth harvesting in here. Wednesday evening up by Carmen Gay, and we have a massive patch of grasshoppers. I don't know how well you can see all these here. I'll zoom in a bit, but this canola is absolutely full of grasshoppers here. So they have completely stripped all the pods off this canola in the corner of the field here. So that's interesting to see. Definitely the worst damage I've seen on canola so far with grasshoppers this year. In here is a good patch of grasshoppers damaging canola. You can see that they have removed the canola effectively along the edge of this field here. So there's been some pretty extensive leaf feeding along here, as well as they've been stripping off some of the flowers and chewing on some of these developing pods. So that is not nice to see. Well, this field of irrigated wheat is looking great at the moment here, but there is a problem developing. There is some sawfly that is starting to show up. Don't see any stems completely cut off or lodging yet, but you can see all this sawdust here in the stems. So as this crop matures, it's likely we might see a little bit of lodging and plant failure from that. Well, here in the dryland corner of this field, there is the odd stem that has fallen and lodged down here, and when you pick them up, they do have kind of that stereotypical notching, you know, almost suction cup style cut off at the bottom there, right above that or below that bottom node. And when you cut open the stems, you can see that we have a bunch of sawdust inside of them. So once again, that is sawfly. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. If it's over, 10 to 15% of the crop, it can be worth swathing to prevent more lodging. But in this case, I don't think it's going to be that bad of a problem. Here I'm back in those hailed out peas down by McGrath, and they're not looking any better really this week. There is some signs of regrowth, which is a bit of an issue at this time of the year, but there was only about an inch of rain that came with all that hail, so it'll probably run out of moisture right away. The pod situation is increasingly worse as the pods dry down and desiccate. A lot of them have split and have very little in them for peas, but there is still going to be a little bit here and there. We basically took off as much as we could for green feed, and we did test nitrate levels, and they were safe at the time. Out in this dryland canola, things are looking very stressed. And when we cut a few stems here, you can actually see we have some definitive blackleg growing in here. Mostly severity 2, 3-ish looks like. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Might result in some earlier maturing on this canola. Well, Friday morning now, and it seems like most places out here to the northwest of Lethbridge kind of got about a consistent half-inch of rain overnight, which, as you can see behind me, has caused a bit of lodging in some of this maturing barley. Now, you can see here it's gone fairly flat in the way that it's fallen. It is even kind of swirled. It's not even all consistent in one direction. So hopefully it kind of bounces back a bit, but at this stage of maturity, it probably won't come back a whole lot. But this might make it more difficult to swath and or harvest. So I guess we'll see how things go in the coming weeks as things continue to mature. Time for questions of the week. I only really got one submission this week, and this white flower that you see here in the field is common yarrow. It is a native rangeland weed. We don't often see it in crop, and when we do, it's not particularly difficult to control, but interesting to see. There won't be a video next week. I'll be away on vacation, spending some time with my family, but I'm sure you guys will manage just fine. Other than some pulses being harvested, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot going on. Most of the canola action will happen in the next few weeks as things start to ripen. So we'll see you then.